Strip club employees, what's the worst drama you've seen behind the scenes? I have no idea what counts as the worst backstage drama in a place like this, and honestly, that's what makes me nervous. Whatever these stories are, I feel like we're about to watch a lot of secrets try and fail to stay secrets. Story 1. His wife stormed into the club looking for the dancer he was hiding in the back. I was a cocktail waitress at a mid-sized club for about a year and a half. Nothing too wild most nights. You get a rhythm going, you learn the people, you keep your head down. The assistant manager had been there for years. Late 30s, wore his wedding ring every shift, had a photo of his kids tucked behind the register. He'd mention his family casually, like normal people do. He was genuinely well-liked because he was relaxed, covered for people, let you leave early when it was slow. Everyone preferred working under him over the actual manager. A new dancer started about 3 weeks before any of this happened. Young, immediately one of the top earners. A little quiet, but not unfriendly. The first thing I noticed was on a slow weeknight. I stepped out the side door on my break to get some air and passed the assistant manager's SUV. He always parked in the same spot near the back. There was movement inside. Him in the driver's seat, her in the passenger seat. It was not a work conversation. The photo of the kids behind the register is doing a lot of heavy lifting right now. I backed away before they saw me, or so I thought. The next few shifts, he was unusually accommodating toward me specifically, offering to cut me early, checking in, extra friendly. I realised pretty quickly that he had seen me, and this was his way of managing that quietly. I didn't say anything to him. I told one co-worker, another waitress I was close with, just because I needed to tell someone. She kept it to herself the entire time. We're still friends. Then came Saturday. Packed house. The bartender flagged me down and told me the assistant manager's wife had called the main line looking for her husband because he wasn't answering his cell. The bartender had gone to find him and couldn't locate him on the floor. We both went quiet for a second. We both knew. The bartender told her he'd have her husband call back and she said she'd hold. He put her on hold and we just looked at each other. Being put on hold while both of you already know, this is an insane situation to be in the middle of. Someone eventually found the assistant manager coming out of the back hallway near the dressing rooms looking flustered. He took the call in the office and came back out looking pale, jaw tight, got back to work like nothing happened. About 30 minutes later, the front door radioed in. His wife had driven to the club and was at the entrance demanding to be let in, loud enough that people coming and going outside were stopping to look. The head bouncer didn't want to let her onto a packed floor. The assistant manager went up front, and they had a very tense, very semi-public argument in the entryway. She was pointing inside the building. She clearly already knew something specific, though I never found out whether someone tipped her off or she'd found something on his phone. She drove there, on a Saturday night, to a packed club. That is not a woman with a suspicion. That is a woman who has already done the math and just needs to see it with her own eyes. She pushed past him into the club and started moving through the floor looking for the new dancer. Bouncers got between her and the crowd before she got far, but there was shoving, raised voices, and the whole energy of the place just collapsed. Customers froze. Staff didn't know where to look. The new dancer was still in the back and had no idea what was happening on the floor, which was honestly the only reason the night didn't get worse. The general manager lived nearby and showed up within 20 minutes looking furious. He sent the assistant manager home on the spot and told the new dancer to leave too. The rest of the shift was dead quiet. The assistant manager was gone within the week, offered the chance to resign, and he took it. The new dancer worked maybe 1 or 2 more shifts before the atmosphere from the other girls made it impossible to stay. I heard months later that he and his wife had separated. I still think about that moment right before it all went sideways, when his wife was standing at the entrance, still scanning the room, like she was maybe hoping she had the wrong place. That look, right before she realised she didn't. The worst part isn't finding out. It's that tiny window where you still have the option to not know for sure. And she chose to close it. I really hope she's doing okay now. Story 2. My co-worker blamed me for thousands in stolen liquor, until a quote-unquote dead camera proved everything. I was a barback at a nightclub for about 4 months when I was putting myself through community college. Hauling ice, restocking, cleaning up after close. Not glamorous work, but the money was good for late nights and nobody asked too many questions. The head bartender had been there for years. Tight with the owner, ran the bar like it was his. His girlfriend worked there too as a cocktail waitress, and everyone treated them like the club's unofficial couple. Genuinely liked the guy when I started. A few months in, I started noticing things during my late closes. Worth mentioning, a while before any of this, the owner had upgraded the club's Wi-Fi router, and I had helped him get it set up. What neither of us realised at the time was that the old security cameras were running on the network, and the new router quietly reconnected them to the owner's cloud backup. I noticed a faint green light flicker on one of the old camera mounts above the bar during a closing shift not long after, but I didn't think anything of it. Everyone on staff had assumed that feed was dead from some old glitch, and I'd heard the head bartender joke about it once. I just filed it away and forgot about it. Back to the pattern I started noticing. He'd still be around after his girlfriend had already left for the night. I'd catch him pulling bottles from the bar stock and passing them to one of the bottle service girls who always seemed to be the last one hanging around. Then they'd disappear down the back hallway together. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was the newest person there by a wide margin, and when I dropped a vague hint to someone once I got nowhere with it, so I understood pretty quickly where the ceiling was on speaking up. Seeing something you know is wrong and having nobody to even tell, that's such a lonely position to be stuck in. But it kept happening. Always the same girl, always after the girlfriend was gone. During busy nights, I also noticed that her regulars would sit at the bar for hours, clearly drinking, but their tabs never reflected it. He just wasn't ringing them up. The bar always felt short by end of night, but I had no proof and no standing to say anything. The owner didn't audit the books very often, so when he finally ran a full count and came up significantly short, we're talking thousands of dollars in unaccounted product, he was furious. Called everyone in and started looking for an explanation. Without missing a beat, the head bartender casually mentioned that I was the one who regularly closed alone with full access to the bar. Said it almost sympathetically, like he hated to bring it up. Stealing for months and then pointing at the broke college kid, and doing it with that fake reluctance. That detail makes it so much worse. I could feel the room shift. The owner pulled me into the back office and told me that if he couldn't figure out where the loss came from, he'd have no choice but to get the police involved. I was a broke college student. That kind of charge could have wrecked everything I was working toward. I was genuinely terrified. Then I remembered the green light. I went to the owner and asked him to pull footage from specific nights. He wasn't thrilled about it, but he agreed. I'll be honest, sitting there waiting for it to load, I had a moment of real doubt. What if the angle was off? What if it hadn't caught the right nights? Everything riding on a camera nobody even knew was still on. That must have been an agonizing wait. It had caught all of it. Well, most of it. The angle clipped the far end of the bar, so a couple of nights were only partial, but enough nights were fully visible that the picture was clear. There was the head bartender, pulling bottles and passing them to the bottle service girl. That alone cleared me. But the footage kept going. On several of those nights, the two of them were pretty clearly not just colleagues in that back hallway, and when the owner pulled up footage from busy nights, he could see exactly what I'd been noticing for weeks. Her regulars at the bar for hours, and not a single drink entered into the system. The stolen bottles were almost beside the point. The real loss was all the free rounds quietly disappearing off the books, night after night. He was fired that same day. She was permanently banned. Word spread through the staff fast, and that included his girlfriend, who was still working there. She came in the following night after it had already made its way through everyone. I don't think she planned anything dramatic. I think she just needed to look at him. He'd come to pick up his last check, and she was already there when he walked in. The room got quiet. Someone nearby suddenly became very focused on wiping down a counter they'd already wiped. Then it wasn't quiet anymore. She was sobbing and furious at the same time, which is somehow harder to watch than just anger. She told him exactly what she thought of him in front of the entire staff. When she walked past him toward the door, he started to say something, told her it was a misunderstanding, and she didn't even slow down, just walked straight out and that was it. A misunderstanding. The man said it was a misunderstanding, on camera, and she didn't even flinch, just kept walking. She was already so far past him. He and the bottle service girl didn't last more than a few months after that. His ex-girlfriend seemed to land on her feet from what people said. The owner apologized to me and promoted me to bartender, stepping directly into the role left behind. I stayed on for another year and a half before I finished school and moved on, but that whole situation still sticks with me. He'd been meticulous about everything. No paper trail, no receipts, never a single obvious move. He just didn't account for the one camera he was absolutely certain wasn't watching him anymore. He spent months being careful about everything he could think of, and the thing that brought it all down was a router getting swapped out on a random Tuesday. You can plan around what you know. It's the thing you already dismissed that gets you. Story 3. My brother's fiancée walked into the club where I secretly worked. I was 21, junior year of college, working the door at a gentleman's club about 40 minutes from campus. Checking IDs, collecting covers, making sure guys weren't too drunk to come in. It paid well under the table and filled in the gaps my financial aid left. I told my family I was working at a bar downtown. Nobody asked too many questions. My older brother, who's about 5 years older than me, had been with his fiancée for 3 years by that point. She was great. Genuinely, the whole family liked her. Wedding was 4 months out, About 2 months into the job, the club absorbed a few dancers from another location across the city that had closed down. I was working the employee entrance one weeknight when she walked in with the group, carrying a duffel bag. We made eye contact and both of us just went white. That is a collision nobody is walking away from clean, not even a little bit. She pulled me aside immediately. She was shaking a little. She told me she'd been dancing for over a year to pay off some debt she didn't want my brother knowing about, and that she was planning to quit before the wedding. She begged me not to say anything. I told her I needed time to think. She thanked me, but the look on her face was pure fear. Here's the thing, though. I was sitting on my own secret. If I told my brother, I'd have to explain how I knew. So I told myself I'd figure it out, and weeks went by. We'd occasionally overlap on shifts. She'd avoid eye contact. I could barely look at my brother at family dinners. I started dodging his calls. I wasn't sleeping well, my grades slipped. I almost brought it up twice and pulled back both times. Family dinners while knowing what he knows. That must take a specific kind of quiet agony to sit through. After about a month, I finally pulled her aside after a shift and gave her an ultimatum. 2 weeks to either tell him herself or quit, or I was going to say something. She told me I was a hypocrite working at the same place. I said she was right, but I was still going to do it. Then she got cold. She told me if I said anything, she'd make sure the family found out where I'd been working too. Mutually assured destruction. We didn't resolve anything. She's not wrong about the hypocrisy, but the second she pulls out a threat, she's not protecting the relationship anymore. She's just protecting herself. About a week later, on a night I wasn't working, someone my brother knew from his job came in and recognized her on stage. He didn't go straight to my brother. He mentioned it to a coworker, it spread. And within a few days it got back to my brother through the grapevine. He called me completely wrecked. And somewhere in the conversation, it became obvious that I wasn't surprised. He picked up on it immediately and asked me directly if I already knew. I couldn't lie. I told him yes. He asked how long. I said over a month. He hung up. We didn't speak for weeks. The engagement fell apart. The whole family eventually found out everything, including where I'd been working. My mum was upset with everyone. My dad just went quiet, which was somehow worse. The quiet dad. Somehow disappointment that doesn't even raise its voice hits harder than anything that does. I quit the club pretty shortly after all of it. When my brother and I finally talked again, months later, he said the hardest part wasn't what she'd been hiding. It was sitting across from me at the dinner table, and knowing I'd looked him in the eyes and said nothing. I didn't have a defense for that. I just apologized. We're on decent terms now. He never got back with her, and he's been seeing someone new for a while. But something between us shifted during all of that, and it hasn't fully come back to where it was. It's been a couple of years. I finished school, moved on. But I still think about that night at the employee entrance. That look on her face. One secret, if you just let it sit, quietly rots everything around it. There's no real villain here, and honestly that's what makes this one linger. Just a bunch of people keeping things from the people they loved most, and none of it ever staying buried for long. I hope that distance between the two of them keeps closing. Story 4. I watched 2 dancers fake a rivalry to double their tips until a stalker exposed them. I ran lights and sound at a club for about 3 years. You're up in the booth, completely out of the way, and people just forget you're there, which means you end up seeing everything. The 2 I'm thinking of were both top earners pretty much from day one. One was heavily tattooed, loud, that rock and roll energy. The other was the total opposite. Sweet, easy to talk to, girl next door type. And from pretty early on, there was this one regular who stood out to me. Came in constantly, spent heavily on the sweet one, made a point of talking about how much he couldn't stand the other girl. Staff had already noticed him. Something about the way he watched her schedule felt off. The so-called feud between the 2 of them started gradually. Cold shoulders in the hallway, dressing room arguments loud enough to carry through the walls. A knocked-over drink that may or may not have been an accident. Management started spacing out their sets so they weren't on at the same time. Meanwhile, the regulars went all in, picking sides like it was some kind of rivalry, spending heavily on their favourite, sitting with their arms crossed through the other's set. Both of them were pulling in more money than before. The way the whole room just reorganised itself around 2 people's beef. Guys are out here picking sides. About 6 months in, the owner pulled me aside one night while I was closing down the booth. He'd been watching the numbers and wanted to know, did anything about the whole drama seem off to me? Performed, maybe? I told him I hadn't noticed anything unusual. The conversation stayed with me. A week or so later, I was heading out through the back lot and just stopped. Both of them were sitting together on the hood of a car a couple blocks from the venue, sharing food, completely relaxed. They'd walked out separately and met up around the corner. I just happened to cut through that way. They looked up and saw me. Nobody said anything for a second. Then the tattooed one said something like, "Well, this is awkward." That pause where everyone's just doing the math at the same time, I would have combusted. Turns out they'd been roommates since before either of them started working there. The whole rivalry was engineered. They'd watched a genuine argument between two other performers once cause regulars to start spending more picking sides, and decided to build an entire act around it. They coordinated which rumours to let slip, choreographed certain arguments, the whole thing. I mentioned the owner had already been asking questions, and I could see that land on both of them. They figured I was safer as someone who knew than as a loose end. I said I'd kept quiet, and planned to stay that way. It wasn't my business and nobody was getting seriously hurt. But they needed to be more careful. They joked that I was their unofficial third partner. The scheme kept going. But that regular was becoming a real problem. He'd started paying close attention to both of their schedules, which alone had people on edge. Then one night at closing, he followed the sweet one out of the lot. Watched her drive to an apartment complex. Watched the tattooed one climb out of the passenger seat. She came in the next evening visibly shaken. Showed me and a couple other staff the messages he'd sent. A long string of them. Said he felt betrayed, called her a scammer, said he'd already been talking to other regulars. Following someone home and then sending a wall of messages about feeling betrayed. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting for a guy who was always just a customer. He followed through. Started showing up and telling anyone who'd listened that the whole thing was staged. Some guys laughed it off. Others who'd spent a lot were visibly annoyed. The vibe shifted fast. Then he showed up outside their apartment building one night. He never got inside, but he sat in the parking lot long enough that a neighbour noticed and called it in. Management found out. It got escalated fast, and he was banned before he could come back. Both of them kept working there for a while after. But without the act, things just went quiet. One left for another club within a couple months. The other stayed a bit longer, then moved on too. Last I heard, they were still roommates, still close, just working different rooms. The whole thing survived everything they threw at it for months. Survived management asking questions. Survived me accidentally finding out. The only thing that actually brought it down was one guy who couldn't handle the idea that he was just a customer. The whole thing survived management. It survived an accidental witness. The one thing it couldn't survive was someone who felt owed. But honestly, still roommates, still close. That's the whole story right there. Story 5. I found out my club regular's wife worked the day shift at my same club. So I danced at a club for about 2 years while I was finishing school. It was a mid-sized place. Just a job that paid well enough to cover tuition, and then some. The thing about that club was it ran 2 completely separate shifts, day and night, and the 2 crews basically never crossed paths. You could work there for months and not recognise half the girls in the building. I was on nights. About 6 months in, I picked up a regular. Late 40s, well-dressed, always polite, and genuinely one of the most generous tippers I'd ever had. He became a fixture, requested me every visit, never caused trouble, always tipped well above anyone else on the floor. He also paid for everything in cash, every single visit, every dinner. At the time, I thought nothing of it. After a while, he started asking to see me outside the club. We went to dinners on my off nights. He opened up about being in what he described as a miserable marriage, said he was thinking about leaving, said I made him feel like himself again. I knew it was complicated. But I'd be lying if I said feelings didn't start to develop on my end. I kept it mostly to myself at work. See, the cash-only thing in hindsight is such a red flag, but when you're in it and you're catching feelings, you're not running forensic accounting on somebody's payment habits. Then one night, a girl on the day shift decided to stay late to catch the evening crowd. A big group had come in during the afternoon, and she was riding it out for the extra money. I'd seen her maybe a handful of times during shift changes. We'd wave, exchange a sentence or two, nothing more. I vaguely knew she was married, but it had never come up between us. My regular walked in. I started heading over and watched him stop dead in the middle of the floor. His face went completely white. I followed his eyes and saw her right there, maybe 30 feet away. Before I could reach him, she spotted him, lit up, and walked straight over. The way she greeted him wasn't the way you greet a stranger. I stopped walking. He saw me standing there and visibly panicked. I walked over anyway. He started stammering something about her being an old friend. She caught the dynamic between us immediately and asked what was going on, her voice already sharp. I asked her how she knew him. She said he was her husband. I don't think a screenwriter could have written a worse moment for him if they tried. My stomach dropped. The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was shame. I had genuine feelings for this man. I had sat across dinner tables from him. And now I was standing there realising I had no idea what I'd actually been a part of. Her first reaction wasn't sympathy. It was fury aimed directly at me. She assumed I knew. I hadn't. Not even close. And then he made it worse. He tried to brush the whole thing off, told her I was just a dancer, that it meant nothing. That was the moment something shifted in me. After every single one of those dinners, "You make me feel like myself again," one sentence and he erased all of it. I turned to her and laid out everything. The dinners, the things he'd said about their marriage, the fact that he'd clearly been keeping us on separate shifts. She went quiet as she started connecting the timeline. Then she said that on every single one of those nights, he'd told her he was working late. That detail hit harder than anything else. Management had him escorted out and banned from the property. The two of us ended up in the back for a long time that night. Raw, uncomfortable, but talking. At one point, she mentioned a work trip he'd taken the previous spring that she'd thought nothing of at the time. The dates lined up with a dinner I remembered. You could see it register on her face. She was processing how long it had been going on. I was processing that the feelings I thought were real had been built on a complete lie. We weren't close after that, but when our shifts overlapped in the months that followed, we'd check in. There was a quiet mutual respect there that didn't need much explaining. She left him. The divorce went through within the year. I finished school not long after and moved on from the club entirely. That situation changed how I approached things. I made a firm rule after that. Whatever a regular says outside those walls, it stays there. I never let myself blur that line again. The part that still gets me is this. That man had been making cash withdrawals specifically to keep everything off the paper trail, running the same routine for months, at the same club, and the only thing that ever caught him was one girl deciding to stay late on a random weeknight. He built this whole airtight system. The cash, the separate shifts, the fake work trips, and it all unravelled because of one slow Tuesday. And somehow those two women walked out of that back room without letting him turn them against each other. That's not nothing. Story 6. I told the bouncer his little brother was blowing his tuition on a dancer at our club. I was bartending at a gentleman's club for about 2 years when this happened. Mid-range place, nothing fancy. You get to know the staff pretty well in a job like that, and the head bouncer was basically the backbone of the whole operation. Longest tenured guy there, someone everyone respected. He worked the back entrance most nights, so I didn't see him constantly, but we talked when we could. Genuine friend. He'd mentioned his little brother a few times over the years. Kid was the first in their family to go to college. Every time it came up, you could see how much it meant to him. He'd also never told his family exactly what kind of place he worked at. Big, intimidating guy, but he had a strict mum, so as far as they knew, he did corporate security downtown. So one Friday night, a young guy comes in. Maybe just turned 21, clearly a little out of his element but trying to play it cool. Sits at the bar, orders drinks, tips fine. Something about the eyes kept nagging at me. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Over the next visit or two, it clicked. He looked like a younger version of my co-worker. I mentioned it to the bouncer the next time he passed through. He laughed it off and said his brother was way too buried in school to be doing anything like that. He also looked a little relieved, which made sense. The kid had no reason to think his brother worked there at all. Plus, it was one of the only clubs nearby that didn't charge a cover on weekends, so it drew in a pretty random crowd. Plausible enough that it was just coincidence. That little flash of relief is so telling. He doesn't actually want to find out. But the kid kept coming back. Fridays, then Fridays and Saturdays. He always gravitated toward the same dancer, one of the more experienced girls, good at her job, good at making people feel like they mattered. I watched from behind the bar as the spending climbed. Pretty soon he was dropping $500 or $600 a night. And it wasn't just money. The way he'd light up when she came over, saving her a drink, always positioning himself to be in her section. He wasn't just spending, he was attached. Then one week he didn't show, and I figured it had run its course. Then he came back the following weekend looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Tired, less put together. His card got declined at the bar. He paid with cash that looked scraped together. Later that same night I caught him in a back hallway on his phone, clearly in the middle of an argument. I only caught a fragment, something about a refund check from school being delayed, before he noticed me and turned away. He came back in and walked straight to the dancer. You don't need the full picture to know what's happening. You just feel it, piece by piece. That's when things shifted for me. I'd told myself for weeks that it wasn't my place, that I wasn't even certain who he was. But I couldn't shake it anymore. After close, I pulled the bouncer aside. Told him his brother had been coming in regularly, described what I'd been watching, the spending, the attachment, the declined card, the phone call. He went quiet. That was worse than if he'd yelled. He thanked me in a flat voice and left early. Turned out he'd already had a bad feeling. Their mum had mentioned the kid seemed off, that his stories about school weren't adding up. He made a few calls after our conversation and confirmed it. The kid had quietly withdrawn from his classes 3 weeks earlier and had been lying to their mum about still being enrolled. The school refund money was almost certainly what he'd been burning through. The lying must take so much more energy than just asking for help. But when you're in that deep, telling the truth probably feels impossible. The following Saturday, the kid showed up like usual. About an hour in, he'd clearly run out of what he had left, and I could see him getting agitated at the bar, insisting his card should work, getting a little loud about it. Another staff member was already moving toward him when the bouncer stepped in from across the room. He stopped his co-worker with a look, took hold of his brother by the collar, and said clearly enough that I heard it from behind the bar. "I've got this one. He's with me." The kid's face went white, then red. He started saying he was grown and made his own decisions. The bouncer didn't argue. He just kept walking him toward the exit. The kid fought it the whole way, shouting that his brother wasn't his father. The dancer had already quietly disappeared toward the back. It took one other staff member to help get them separated once they were outside. Both of their secrets out in front of each other at once. That must be a brutal kind of honesty. The bouncer took the rest of that night off. First time I'd ever seen that happen. The kid never came back. A couple months later, the bouncer mentioned his brother had re-enrolled at a community college closer to home. Their mum had found out everything. The brothers didn't speak for a long time after that. I moved on from the job not long after, but before I left I heard they'd started talking again. Still working through it, but talking. I wasn't totally sure at first that telling him had been the right call, but hearing the kid re-enrolled, that helped. Hearing that re-enrollment detail makes this whole thing feel worth it. Still working through it is a whole lot better than the alternative. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out this video next.